On the 3rd of June 2005, I took the last few steps and I arrived on the top of Everest, and it concluded a journey that had taken about, 15 years. And I was disappointed to find that there wasn't, in fact, a R1,000,000 check pinned to the top, as a lot of people unbelievably think to themselves. No, in fact, my hope this evening is to share with you the complex and the creative nature about turning adventure into a lifestyle. You heard in '96 I resigned, I left sales, but it stood me in good stead, and I went to Everest. We thought, if we get up, it's going to be easier to meet girls, we're going to make a lot of money. We never got up. I got back, and I struggled to meet girls, and you can see why. I lost about 15 kilograms on that expedition. Does that picture have to stay there for 20 seconds? But it did do something. It seemed people wanted to, they had a desire to go to similar places. And if they were going to go there, they wanted to go with someone that was credible. It seemed spending 70 days on Everest had given us a little bit of credibility. And with that, we began to realize there were opportunities to maybe find individuals that wanted to go to unusual places. And so the journey started with the 7 summits simply because Antarctica, Kilimanjaro, North America's highest Denali, they were logistically complicated places that most people like yourselves, might have an interest to go to, but really had no clue. And so as the years went by, we not only became skilled at finding these people, but also good at logistics, about figuring out what needs to go and what needs to stay behind. You see, if you want a reasonable shot at climbing Everest, for example, that's pretty much what you need to take for about 2 or 3 of you. No, actually, that was for a team of about 60 of us. But we began to see that there was a premium to be charged in understanding logistics and offering that service to individuals that might go further than Kilimanjaro, that might want to go to Antarctica, right? Personally, coupling that journey was the desire to push ourselves to greater expeditions, to test the limits of not just trying to achieve a summit or getting to the top of a peak, but also understanding about things like human physiology and coping with the challenges. Now, while you're looking at those funny, interesting bottles, I must tell you one of the hardest things I had to do was drink 6 liters of olive oil to get to the South Pole. I know there's some tough guys out there. I challenge you, drink one of those little bottles and you'll begin to understand it's not all glamorous going to these places. Anyway, part of the challenge was not just understanding about how human physiology would survive out there. It was about dealing with lonely places where, in fact, Antarctica is so foreign, there's no bacteria. Not that you'd see bacteria, but you wouldn't cough and you wouldn't particularly get a cold, which is a bit crazy, right? But you'd battle to deal with the isolation of being away from home. I remember a day on the South Pole, about 50 days in, I made the mistake of phoning home on Christmas Day. The family was together, they were eating prawns and pasta, and I looked at my bottle of olive oil. I may as well have been on the far side of Pluto. That is how miserable I felt. I've had to learn how to deal with extreme cold. I know you think it gets cold in Johannesburg. I promise you, it does not. That place gets cold. Minus 65 was the coldest I've ever experienced. How do you do a number 2 when it's minus 65? I know you're thinking it. You do it exactly the same way. The only difference is you do it very quickly, okay? You typically have about 10 seconds, and if you don't get it done in 10 seconds, you run the risk of Arctic willy, which is where the tip of your willy gets frostbite. It's not a problem women experience particularly often, but I was sensitive in my groin for about 5 days, and I wasn't sure whether I got Arctic willy. One of the challenges is to deal with failure, about not getting up the objective. Last year I went to the Karakoram. Our long-term goal was to climb K2, the second highest mountain, and we figured rather than just go and spend 7 dangerous weeks on the peak, we would climb a neighboring peak, which is Broad Peak, one of the 8,000ers. And so we spent just short of 8 weeks in tents, battling high winds, battling snow, and constantly through that time wishing we were somewhere else. And so in retrospect, that expedition to Baltoro last year was simply nothing more than a very expensive camping trip. But there is an upside to what I do, and that is that on a rare day, in Antarctica specifically, the ice crystals blow in a certain way, and if the angle of light is right, you can stop just for a moment, and it makes sense where you are, because you know you see something that very few eyes will see. The challenge is to be conscious in that moment, to be conscious of what's happening around you, of understanding what's important, what's not important. I mean, there have been trips where we have gotten nowhere near the summit, but I've been able to stand and see the clouds clear and see a view, not just of the mountain, but of something inside, a confirmation that, you know what, maybe we can do this. Maybe we can come back another time. Not everyone is able to articulate those things, and one of the challenges is to turn that into a revenue stream, to come back and to take those moments and to put them into a way that people can hear and understand in maybe not a dissimilar way, but something that makes sense, to write about it. And so as this evolution continues, there's also the question about what next. It's ultimately a personal challenge. It's about thinking of something that's going to test you, that might have a bit of interest and a bit of fun. And so in December last year, 2 friends and I pulled that horrible little cart over the sand dunes of the Naukluft Desert in Namibia. And the idea is to try and do a man-powered crossing of the Arabian Desert in the peninsula of Arabia, the empty quarter. The challenge obviously is heat. I'm looking for a sunscreen sponsor because we almost certainly guaranteed to be toasty and crispy. What we also guaranteed, which just thrills me no end, is that there's no chance of frostbite. Over the years, living in Johannesburg, I've grown a profound and deep distaste of the cold. And so I'm now trying to find ways where I can do something and go to places like this where there's no risk. But I thought it prudent that I ended with incontrovertible proof that I didn't get Arctic Willie. Thank you.